Kate Winkler Dawson.
And I'm Paul Holes.
This is Buried Bones. Hey, Paul.
Hey, Kate. How are you today?
I'm doing really well. Happy Halloween.
Oh, you too.
We're a couple days off, but we start, I've said this before, we start so early, and, my friend is back over here.
Yep.
So I like to get early festive around here. And I know you said you guys throw up some stuff and that's it. You're very anticlimactic about Halloween. You're sort of like, we'll answer the door and give the kids some treats.
Yeah. There's aspects of Halloween that I could most certainly really get into, but just really have never taken the effort. I've never really been to a costume party. I'm kind of a fuddy-duddy. I don't get dressed up. So
fuddy-duddy. Okay. That I would never have called you, but you can own that if you're a fuddy-duddy. Well, so I have kind of an odd internal debate that I have with myself every Halloween for a couple of years in a row. Tell me what you think about this. For a few years in a row, these are not our neighbors, but they're on a major road. It's a family that lives on the kind of a major road it's near a grocery store and across the street from like a little snow cone place. A lot of kids travel along it. For the last few years, this family, as many families do, they decorate the outside of the house for Halloween, but they've done something interesting, which is they sort of put up a reenactment of a scene that was from maybe like a Friday the 13th or Halloween, which, is what I grew up with. I mean, I'm a Halloween fan. I don't like horror movies, but I don't know. There's something about Jamie Lee Curtis trying to kill Michael Myers that I find endearing. Okay. And, I had seen the original, but it is that scene that you and I have actually talked about in True Detective, which is the screaming woman who's sort of flailing on the ground. And, the killer coming after her. And so they have made this, and this actually happened a few years ago. They had made this scene. And so it is a mannequin doll kind of thing that looks terrified and is screaming, and then an axe murderer coming after her. And there were all sorts of complaints because it scares little kids. I mean, sure. This is down the street from an elementary school, but it's also a legitimate part of Halloween. It's from the history of people my Generation X, people, who grew up with that. But I mean, it's also kind of in the True Detective realm too, which is kind of gross. I don't know if Halloween aged that well. Young people having sex and then being murdered is kind of the way I summarize a lot of those stories. So what do you think about that? I mean, it's Halloween, and you should be festive, but at the same time, little kids are crying, and but don't you have a right to put up whatever you want as long as it's not offensive?
First, I've never seen the movie Halloween, so I can just envision though exactly what you're talking about, and. To clarify, when you say, out of True Detective, you're talking about the True Detective magazines.
Right, the magazines.
And, for somebody who's worked the cases I've worked, those True Detective magazines are characterized as porn for the sexual sadist. Because they literally get off seeing women in such compromised positions, screaming, the man holding a knife up against her, she's bound in some way, etc. All these various permutations. And, on one level, it's I can understand the Halloween costume. It's concept. It's in fun. People kind of gravitate towards the spooky and the ghoulish. And so I think I'm torn about something like that. I think because of this location, maybe this type of setup would be something that should be a little bit more hidden from plain view. And I've seen some of these pretty extensive Halloween displays for, trick-or-treaters, and people will have like a fairly, tame display up front that the little kids can walk through. And then there'll be a source of candy right there. And then there's also a secondary location for the adults to go into. And there's a sign that basically is saying, graphic past this point.
Mhm.
I think doing something like that maybe is, I don't want to use the term responsible because I don't want anybody listening to think I'm, if they get heavily involved, yeah, that I'm just being a fuddy-duddy. But I just think take a look at who typically is out and about on Halloween night, and you are dealing with 5 and 7-year-olds.
Yeah.
There's reasons why we don't want young children to have this type of imagery, but I also don't want to, go, well, don't have fun either, because everybody has, has different experiences that they want to have on Halloween. So, I'm kind of torn, but I think, maybe keeping something that's that graphic a little bit more out of plain view may be a better way to do it.
And, it's interesting because, there was a lot of outrage on kind of our neighborhood Facebook page and stuff, which I understood. But there's so many horrible, what I would say are fun, but that are violent imagery for Halloween out there. But it is all fake stuff. It is like ghouls and goblins and the headless horseman holding his own head, which I love, by the way. Like there's all that kind of stuff that legitimately will scare you, but it's not real. It's supernatural. That scene depicting some mass murderer going after a woman was that was realistic. I mean, it didn't look like real people to me, but it was depicting a scene that was definitely out of a slasher film that my kids unfortunately do watch. But they, having a 6-year-old see that would be pretty awful. And the neighbors who did it really were pissed. I mean, that's the only way I can describe it, from the backlash. And they put up in dramatic fashion, they put up like a sheet, like maybe several bed sheets, and covered the scene from the street. And then they had spray painted essentially the name of our neighborhood, censored by the name of the neighborhood. I just thought, okay, so it was dramatic, Yeah.
Yeah. It's, and I know it's hard, and I can see where people would really polarize with something like that.
Yeah.
Where I was living in California, there's this one couple that did this amazing Dexter scene in their garage.
Oh.
Where literally it's Dexter standing over a saran wrapped body, and there's blood everywhere and everything like that. But it was tucked back into the garage itself, so you could see as a parent walking your kids, you're going, well, I'm not taking them in there. So.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, I think it was a balance. I thought that was an interesting story because if I had little kids, I'd be kind of offended too, for sure. But then I look back and I go, I love that kind of movie. But then I thought, but it just didn't age well, especially when you and I was just telling my class this today about the true crime detective, and you telling me that, some of the most well-known serial killers were found with these magazines and what that really means. And so, that's the part of Halloween that I think can be really touchy for people.
No,
so,
for sure.
Yeah. So, let's scare the shit out of little kids, but in a different way, maybe right now. Save the horror films for later. And this was up for several weeks before Halloween even started. So,
of course,
they were milking it for sure. But then hopefully nobody's offended by my pal back here, the one who's desperately still hoping that Victorian chairs are comfortable, which they aren't. So if you see me shifting around, I don't know if you've ever noticed me shift around in this chair, probably about 3/4 through basically every episode we've ever done. It's because my left butt cheek has fallen asleep because the chair needs to be somehow updated. But I feel bad. I see why the Victorians could be so uptight.
Well, when I was having a lot of pain in my left hip, I was using one of those. To me, it looks like a hemorrhoid pillow, just so it was softer and that would avoid some of the pain, versus now my hip is better. So, I don't have to have that hemorrhoid pillow underneath me anymore.
I can't believe we're talking about this. We went from Jason and Michael Myers to hemorrhoid pillows. That was a good transition.
Yep.
Well, I promised you a spookier story, and we're going to have spooky stories here because this is a lot of missing people. And we're trying to sort out who's responsible and what is happening where.
Okay.
So this is also a spooky time period, 1870s in the Midwest. I don't know if that's a spooky area for you, but vast open. I am scared of vast open spaces also. I'm scared of the countryside and the vast open spaces. Where am I not scared? I guess by the ocean. And so this is the Midwest in the 1870s, and it's a little bit of a Halloween story.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, let's set the scene. We are in 1873. It's May 6th, and we are outside of a wooden cabin. This part of the frontier is 14 miles east of Independence in Kansas and a half a mile southeast of a couple places that I've never even heard of before. And so we are in what they would say then was Indian Territory, which is a very treacherous place. And it's not because of the Osage Native Americans, but rather all of these criminals and fugitives that have run from the East Coast out to, the frontier to escape justice. So already we're in kind of a lawless area to begin with. And we're at this cabin and we have it's a small space. And the reason is because on the frontier prairies, lumber is really scarce. And so everything was, very small. When I was in Cape Cod a couple of months ago with my family, we stayed in a 18th century home, and my kids kept saying the ceilings are so low. And you and I had discussed this before where, I thought, oh, maybe the men were of shorter stature back then. And I know that can happen. But I had a listener email me, and what she said makes sense, which is just the lack of resources meant that they were not going to make tall ceilings in the 1700s potentially. And so, they made them just tall enough. But, the friend that was with me is tall, and that was not a good...
Not comfortable.
I think these were like 6 foot, maybe 6.5 ceilings. And okay. So, it was interesting. So anyway, this is a small cabin, and the family that lives there squeezes into about 400 square feet. And they're using half of the cabin as a storefront, which is pretty interesting. So they took a canvas wagon cover and divided the space into 2 different rooms. And I'll tell you about the family in a bit because they're in trouble. They're missing. And the front part of the cabin, just to give us some context, like I said, is a general store. And the kind of business they built was just, something that was very profitable in this time because you have so many people who are just pushing west, literally pushing west. And so you have all of these homesteaders and frontiersmen who needed to buy supplies and provisions, and they want tobacco, and they can get all of it from this particular store. And it's on the what's called the Osage Trail. Okay. And they could also grab dinner there if they wanted to. So a remote space, and I wanted to show it to you. And so there are quite a few, for 1871, there are a decent amount of photos for this story. And so this might be a good time to just show you, because we do have a missing family, how remote we're talking about here. So open up your photos, but be very gentle about where you're going. I don't want to ruin too much here. So the first photo and the second photo only. Check it out. And you could see this is the cabin. First one's a, kind of a closer up shot, so you can kind of just see the size. And these are locals who are around the cabin because it does turn into a pretty bad crime scene. And then you'll see the second one, which is a sketch and a depiction. I just wanted you to see the wideness of what we're talking about.
This cabin looks like it's just on open plains. If there's any vegetation, looks like it's, weeds and grass.
Yeah.
No trees anywhere in sight, really. The cabin itself, this is it's a single story gable roof. I mean, it's hard to call it a house. It's tiny. I'm shocked about how many different products that they are selling.
Yeah.
Out of this. But yeah, no, it is definitely remote, and it looks like you can see in any direction all the way to the horizon. There's no hills. Mm-hmm. Nothing that's really blocking it. And then the sketch just shows, the cabin with maybe a few other structures, and then horses and various, people, I'm assuming, that are, along this, what is Osage Trail, passing through. So, immediately, of course, the remoteness is significant. And then the transient nature of the population at this location. Because people are just constantly, flowing along the trail.
So for me, when I think about the Dust Bowl that will happen decades later, this shows why it would happen.
Yeah.
With no vegetation, dry dirt, drought conditions, massive winds coming in and creating like a cyclone effect. There's nothing in this scene feels grounded to me. Just like a gust of wind could knock over this whole little homestead here.
Well, and I look at this, and if I were, somebody that was looking for a place to live, it wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So,
I'm glad that Allison, our crack researcher on this one, found the photos because, I had pictured off a trail. I know it's naive to think this, but I had pictured off a trail just rows of trees and kind of in a forested area, places where people could sneak around and jump the family and stuff. And no, there's nowhere to hide with this.
Nope.
They are literally coming down almost like a desert, stopping. And there's a sign that's not there anymore that said groceries. So when you're talking about being vulnerable, as this family would be, you're in this open space, you're advertising that you have items that are valuable. And maybe you have some guns, but with enough people, if they show up, if you've got a gang of criminals show up here, this family is wiped out almost instantly. There's 4 people living here. So there's Elvira and John Sr., and then Kate and John Jr., and those are their adult children. So you've got 4 people in, let's just say, 200 square feet, which this cottage is, a little less than 200 square feet. Then you've got the storefront. I don't know how much the storefront is, but man, isn't it ironic that all of that space, and because of a lack of lumber, they have to make this little tiny house. They're the only ones around for miles and miles and miles.
Yeah, and there's also no services.
Yeah.
You think about it, something happens to this family. Where's law enforcement coming from? How far away is law enforcement? Or any neighbors really to be able to help out?
The people who come across this, they're alarmed because, again, we always come back to I always use the same example of the woman who left the laundry out overnight and it rained and she didn't bother to come pick it up. Something's happened to that woman. I mean, that's how we know. And in this time period, people were very alarmed because they had cattle roaming loose all over the property. I didn't see it, but there's apparently some kind of fencing that's up, to keep the cattle in. They do have cattle. It looks like they've been unfed for at least several days. And without vegetation, I assume it's grain that they had to buy. So, these are starving cattle. And so that's what makes this really alarming for neighbors. They said that the cabin had been either the people had been taken or they had left very quickly. There's half-eaten food and mugs of coffee on the table still. Okay. There's pots and pans that are on the stove like they had been cooking. Utensils are scattered all over the floor. There are insects everywhere. There's clothing all over the place. Furniture's overturned. That grocery sign has been pulled down. And this is bad news, I think, for this family in this remote area when you're surrounded by hostility all over the place.
Yeah. So, the disruption to the inside, that's where I'm wondering, is this a result of ransacking? Somebody's in there looking for something.
Mm-hmm.
Was there combat? Was there a fight? Was some of that attributed to, maybe the family resisting being abducted, if that's what happened? With the cattle being unfed for several days, once, the discoverers get there, I mean, the trail is cold at this point, because it happened several days prior.
And you have to think, I don't know how popular this trail is, but you have to be a good planner to follow along this trail because it could be hundreds of miles before you see one of these, like we talked about way stations, in one of our other stories where it's predictable. It's like seeing the gas in 10 miles sign up on the highway. So you have to know what you're doing. If there are people coming in and attacking this family that's really vulnerable, there are 2 adult children I had mentioned. And by adult, I mean 20s, very early 20s. And I don't know who's armed there or not, but like I said, it just didn't seem like it would be a stretch to have even a few people be able to come and I don't know what the motivation is to take them, or if they've been killed and they're buried different places. I guess we don't know yet. I just have to kind of give you some more information.
Well, also with the the family itself, but also the storefront, there needs to be a regular delivery of product. So that's also somebody that is going to be flowing through here, because unless they, how far away are they from the nearest town? Are they going someplace to restock their store, or is somebody actually, using a horse-drawn wagon to do deliveries?
Well, it says 14 miles east of Independence, but they're a half a mile southeast of Moorhead Station in Lubbock County. Okay. So they're a half a mile from something that has a name.
Yep, that's not bad.
But where they are doesn't really have a name. It's sort of like Indian territory, quote unquote, is what I see. Mm-hmm. So that's how remote they are. But again, open spaces like that, there's almost like where are you going to run? But they obviously have been able to build a business. And but I will say that this area has really spooked people for a long time. Along this trail, there have been quite a few people who have gone missing. And I don't mean specifically right in this area, where the cabin is, but it's just been people who have said, I'm going to go on the Osage Trail. And we've talked about this before. It is not unusual. It's like going out to sea. It's not unusual to not see a loved one for weeks or even months at a time when they are pushing west and trying to find new territory, and everything is brand new and they don't know what's around the corner. So it wouldn't have been unusual for somebody to go missing for a while and then they pop right back up.
I could see that. And I could also see where this is a built-in victim pool, if you will, for people that, whether you want to say they have financial motive, robbers, they'll start picking off people as they're going along this trail. Wouldn't be surprised if you have, predators that are, sexually assaulting and killing, some of these travelers. Mm-hmm. Predators go to where the prey's at. And here you have prey that are just, in many ways, going to be helpless. They might be armed, but everybody was armed back in this day.
Okay. Now we have a little bit of a jumpy timeline, but I think you can keep up with me here.
I'll try.
Okay. About, I would say, a month earlier, this is where they start thinking about the different disappearances and discoveries in this area that could be tied to the missing family. So about a month earlier, there is a wagon found and a starving team of horses, one of which was lame. And this wagon had been found about 12 miles north toward Thayer. There were no bodies found, but this was suspicious. People in this area, certainly in the frontier, would not abandon a wagon and certainly perfectly good horses. So they assumed that somebody had been taken. And we're still trying to figure out who owns that wagon. But, that was over 2 years, starting in 1971. This was sort of the similar circumstances to what has happened before. So a few days before that wagon was discovered, there are a pair of brothers who are concerned about their missing brother. And they are actually well known. So Colonel Alexander York and his brother Ed York had traced the disappearance of their brother along this trail. He was named Dr. William York, and that they knew that he had stopped at the house, he had eaten a meal there, he had watered his horse, he bought some provisions, and then he took off. And no one had seen or heard from him since. And then, of course, we can't ask the family because the family's not there either. His brothers and his pregnant wife and his 3 children are in a neighboring county, and they're very nervous because they don't know what happened. But they do know that, he had ridden away. So after spotting the loose cattle, the people on the prairie had assembled like a search party, and that had been led by a guy named Sergeant Leroy Dick, who was a Civil War veteran. And he was a township officer, which is about as close as to a sheriff as you're going to get. He divided the party into 3 groups. One group explored the stables of this family. And so this would be John and Elvira's stables, where the cattle and the horses would have been. And then another group patrols Spill Out and Drum Creeks on the land. And then a third group, which includes the sergeant, searches the cabin. So you've got these 3 groups working kind of at the same time. So the group with the cabin reports this. They find a dozen bullet holes that have speckled the roof and the sides of the cabin. So somebody has shot, there are a dozen bullet holes there. And they find a bloodstained knife with a 4-inch tapered blade, and it was in the mantle clock. So, the clock that's sitting on the mantle, and it sounds really, really chaotic. So you've got, guns and knives at a minimum here. And wedged behind the grocery counter is a horse bridle. And Ed York, who is the brother of Dr. William York, says that was his brother's horse bridle. Now, I didn't know that horse bridles could be that distinct. I don't see anything about initials or anything. But Ed York, who happens to be there, says this is my brother's bridle, and it's behind the counter of the grocery.
So Dr. William York, his horse bridle is actually found somewhat hidden inside of this cabin, like somebody's trying to tuck it away.
Yep. And then you've got the bloody knife that's inside the mantle clock. And then you've got bullet holes, a dozen bullet holes in the roof and the sides of the cabin. And then here's where things get kind of graphic to me. There's a bad odor that pervades the room. And the searchers, Sergeant Dick says it's really particularly coming from a trap door, which is concealed by a straw mattress. Trapdoor is not unusual, of course, especially in it would be for the Midwest in the 1800s, and people would store stuff down there, blah, blah, this is not anything odd. So they move the mattress, and the search party pries open the door, and this is a awful stench that they all recognize is death. The joists beneath the trapdoor are stained with what appears to be blood. The door reveals a small cellar room. It is 6 feet deep, 7 feet square to the top, and 3 feet square at the bottom. I don't even know what math that is.
So 6 feet deep.
With 6 feet deep, yep.
By 3 by 7.
That's enough for a body, right? The 6 feet part, for sure.
Oh,
3
yeah.
feet,
No.
3 feet
for
bottom.
For multiple bodies.
So without ventilation, they can't, nobody's going in that cellar because it's disgusting and smelly. It's too strong and they're vomiting. So they set up a pulley system and they place the cabin on log rollers and tie it to a horse and pull the structure aside. Ingenuity. It's like the cop with the magnets on a string trying to fish out a wagon. Trying to fish out a weapon in the river.
Yeah, it's like the FBI collecting the Unabomber's cabin,
So they shove this little cabin to the side. Even with the breeze, the rancid air leads 2 men to vomit. And, I know you've dealt with a lot of dead bodies and a lot of different, stages of decomposition. My first real experience was when I went to the quote unquote body farm at Texas State University to, interview the head of the forensic anthropology program there. And he took me to the outside area where the bodies were buried and doing research. And he said, I know this is weird, but it's like we solve crimes here. We teach people forensics here. And there were students testing the temperature of the bodies based on how deep they were buried. There were bodies that had cages on them because the people had requested that they didn't want vultures or deer or anybody to have access except for the bugs and stuff. And they were building a small house in which they were going to put a body in to show a law enforcement agency, a federal one, I can't remember if it was the FBI or who it was, what it would be like if you burned down a house with a body inside. And so they were doing real work, but it was 103 degrees and I was walking around and even exposed. It was so distinctive. I couldn't even, he said, "Oh, you're going to get used to it." I did not get used to it. I can tell you that. But, it was a good learning experience, but it is a distinctive smell, especially when there's decomposition there,
No, it definitely is. I mean, it's something that I immediately recognize. And I've been on scenes that are really, really bad in terms of the decomp and the circumstances, or even at the morgue. I would say the worst, and I'm not going to get, it's not graphic. It's just that we had to exhume up a homicide victim that had been found floating in the Sacramento River Delta. And his head and hands had been cut off. And then he had been weighed down in the water, but he was literally bobbing at the surface. And he had been buried, I don't know, for 10 plus years at least. And his body was buried below the water table in the ground. And so he continued to soak in water while he was in the ground. So he was exhumed. And I remember driving to work that morning, and I was blocks away from where my office was, which was just above the morgue. And I could start smelling him that far away.
Oh my gosh.
It was powerful, Now, I mean, the smell is something that you get used to. You have to deal with it.
Yeah.
I always laugh if you watch Silence of the Lambs and you have Jodie Foster, Clarice Starling going into where there's this, body that they've recovered, and her coworkers are putting, Vicks vapor rub underneath her nostrils. And it was just like, oh, nope.
It's not going to do it.
And quite frankly, you'll be ridiculed. You're showing weakness. There's a certain aspect where you just have to suck it up and deal.
So tell me, I'm going to tell you what you could expect, which is clotted blood stains in the cellar floor. And there's a narrow passageway that leads under where the house had been into the backyard vegetable garden and apple orchard. So, you've got these places where bodies can be. They had, had this awful smell, but no bodies when they pulled out the house. But they, now see this passageway that goes to the orchard and the vegetable garden. So now where do you stand with this? It's a big mystery, and you probably don't even have enough information, but you've got a missing family. You've got missing people that have been reported, a wagon that's been abandoned a month earlier. There's all kinds of pieces. You see, this is what our Halloween special gets us into.
Well, I think that, first, just from the crime scene of the house, you've got these, 20, bullet holes in the roof and the side of the cabin. I'm kind of curious, are those bullet holes, all being shot from within the cabin going out? Are they being shot from outside the cabin going in? Or do you have a combination of both? Like maybe you have a gunfight going on with offenders on the outside of the cabin and you have the family trying to ward them off. But obviously they have at least a dead body that appears that some of the blood, and who knows if there's decomp fluid, soaks down from, let's say, the trapdoor area onto the joists. And then that body was in this little cellar room for a period of time, decomposed, 103 degrees outside, very warm area. So probably, started to bloat and give off the decomp smell fairly quickly. And then somebody came back and moved that body. So what they're smelling is the remnants, the decomposing, fluids that are still in the cellar room, but the body isn't there. And now why would somebody feel compelled to do that? So that's, one of the questions. And then the other thing is this connection to the missing Dr. William York and the horse bridle. So that would suggest that there is a connection between those two cases.
Also, kind of once we get deeper into this, I don't think anybody would be surprised about a trapdoor. I certainly don't think anybody would be surprised about a passageway leading from, the basement area, storage area to an orchard or a garden because that's just the way these were built in some ways. It's obviously it's an easy passage where you can kind of just shove, food down and you're not hauling things all over the place. These were practical people. So, and they were raising animals and farming and all of that kind of stuff. So don't be suspicious of that if you were in any way.
Not at all.
So Ed York this is so unfortunate. He's searching for his brother and they go over to the apple orchard. We've had stories about things happening in apple orchards before. And he has a metal wagon rod and he's probing the earth and it hits something. Just a few feet below the surface, there's a body. And it does turn out to be Dr. William York, who's buried in this orchard. And how awful for his brother to find him there. Dr. York was buried face down. He was only wearing his underwear. The back of his head was smashed in. His throat had been slashed ear to ear. And when the search party exhumes the body, he sees what he says is clearly, a death by blunt force trauma. Although my guess is that the slashing from ear to ear could have just as easily done it. The investigator finds some hammers and they are beneath the cabin stove. And I wanted you to see the hammers. So there's a shoe hammer, had never seen one, 3-inch claw hammer, I've seen one, and a handmade 5.5-pound sledgehammer. Sounds petrifying.
So what I'm looking at is what appears to be a glass display cabinet. So I'm assuming this is like in a museum somewhere. And then you have these 3 hammers that are inside a blue box, and they're mounted in this blue box. And these hammers, I'd say there's a small, medium, and large one. You see on the left-hand side, you see a small hammer with a very, a narrow face and short claws. And then on the right side, you see a medium-sized hammer that has a very large face, and then just a single claw, if you will. And then in between those 2 hammers is the one I'm going to say is large, which is a, short-handled sledgehammer. Mm-hmm. And all 3 of these weapons are capable of inflicting pretty significant damage to a person, with, of course, the sledgehammer being able to inflict the most damage just due to its sheer size and weight.
I went down a pretty weird rabbit hole thinking about these 3 hammers and what were I'm sure I'm not the only one who thinks like this, but like what would inflict the most damage versus what's the easiest to use and conceal? Is it like the small pointy hammer which could really pierce, or is it the blunt of this sledgehammer? And then I said, Halloween needs to be over with sooner rather than later for me. I'm thinking bad thoughts here.
No, but let's say on Dr. York's skull, if these hammers had been used, there's some distinctive features of each of these hammers. So let's say all 3 had been used on the back of his head, but there's also blows on other parts of his head. You might be able to tie select wounds and skull fractures to each of these hammers.
From your mouth to someone's ear. That's what they did. So there was a round wound on the back of Dr. York's head, and they said it matched perfectly to the shoe hammer.
Okay.
Which was the medium one that you had mentioned. The search party loads Dr. York into a coffin and then puts him on the wagon. And the searchers are talking. And this is where the experience that you and I have talked about over and over again, people who know the area, and especially people who know the history of the area, who have been there a long time, like the case of the serial killer who was caught because someone in Canada recognized, a crime that sounded very similar to what happened in, I think it was Vermont. And he was able, this one guy made the connection, a judge made the connection. And so that's kind of what happens here. So the search party is standing around and one of them says, okay, this reminds me of the wagon that we had talked to, the abandoned wagon, but no one believes is some innocent wagon with perfectly good horses that has been abandoned. But they said, this is even weirder. So in May of 1871, so this is 2 years earlier, two little boys discover the body of a guy named William Jones in Drum Creek, which is around this property. And they said that there were distinctive wagon wheel tracks that had been found near the body. One of the back wheels was, they said, dished the wrong way. And then they concluded why, which is that it had been carrying a load that was way too heavy and the load had been shifted and it kind of twisted the wheel. Again, historical context, that's not something I would have thought of. And so they said they've got this distinctive track. We know exactly what caused it. But no luck. They couldn't find who it was. Again, they're on this remote trail in the middle of nowhere. So then we've got about, let's say 7 months later, no, longer than that, February of 1872, after the snow thawed around Drum Creek, where William Jones was found, the body of a guy named John Phillips was found. But they weren't getting a ton of forensic, if you could even call it that, information because wild hogs had mutilated his remains. So it was difficult to figure out the cause of death. But, I guess it could have been suicide or starvation, but they didn't know. But his father, of course, was convinced that he was murdered. But no one's connecting it to the cabin. These are people who were found on, these two guys were found on the property. So far, now, what do you think? Now we're talking about, Dr. York, and then you're talking about William Jones, in Drum Creek, which is very close by. And then you've got this guy, John Phipps. But they're spread out. They're years apart,
Yeah, and this is just where what is the, I guess, the typical pattern of crime or deaths in this particular area. So because that's critical for an investigator to go, okay, hold on. I remember these cases from 2 years ago, but I imagine, in the Wild West or in this period of time, there's probably a lot of accidental deaths. There's exposure, deaths. Somebody's out there working in the field and isn't hydrating and ends up dying. So it's hard to say that there's anything conclusive about these two bodies, William Jones and John Phillips, to say that it's related. I think William Jones is interesting just from what appears to be the presence of a wagon that they're convinced is somehow related to his death. Mm-hmm. And you fast forward 2 years, and then you have Dr. William York, and then you have the family, Elvira John and their 2 adult children, mm-hmm. who are just missing. And then Dr. York is found literally buried on their property.
Yeah.
So I think it's possible that you have, and I'm just going to use the term predator very loosely. I'm not connotating that I'm dealing with a sexually motivated predator, but I think it suggests that you have somebody who is preying on people in this area over the course of several years, potentially. And then what is that person's motive? Dr. William York is found just in his underwear. Well, is that because there's a sexual aspect to this, or is that because the offender needed a change of clothes for one reason or another, mm-hmm. and took those or utilized? Now, I was going to say, is this a way to further control Dr. York by rendering him in essence naked outside of his underwear? I think that's less likely. I think the offender possibly just needed his clothes. Maybe to dress up in something else than what he'd been seen in previously. But even though it's a male victim, it doesn't eliminate the possibility that there's a sexual motive. So right now, I think I'm wide open. Okay. I just think it does sound like somebody is preying on people in this area, and they took over. They commandeered the cabin, and seems like they had Dr. York with them when they did commandeer that cabin, and chances are the family is dead and buried either in the same apple orchard or somewhere else.
So I messed up one date.
Okay.
So, and let me just, and it actually, I don't think is going to make a difference, but the body count is different. So in May of 1871, that's when they find William Jones, and that's the weird wagon tracks, and that's in Drum Creek. Then in February of 1872, The snow had started to thaw, and they found 2 more unidentified bodies. It just says on the prairie, but they mean off this trail. So in this area, enough where they go, okay, they can call this an area. And they're all men. So you got those 3. And then you have, in December of that same year, John Phipps. He was the one who was attacked by the wild hogs. We don't know his cause of death. I can say the 3 men. So that is William Jones plus the 2 identified men. Their bodies were intact, and the same thing that happened to Dr. York happened to them. Heads bashed, probably by a hammer, throats cut. And so now you've got all of these bodies here.
And in their state address, do you have any information as to that?
No, it's not. They're fully dressed. It's not the same situation. And, you've got York where the house is, where that orchard is. And these other 3 people are there, but they're not directly, where the cabin is. So we have all of these searchers talking about it. And in the meantime, they're also searching the stable. Now we're back in 1873 at the homestead that's, this family is gone. The wagon and the team of horses are gone in the stable that normally would have been there. I will tell you, it turns out that the wagon that had been abandoned was their wagon, the family's wagon. So John and Elvira's wagon is the one that looked like it had been totally abandoned, and that was found about a month ago.
So now you're dealing with a month-long trail that's gone cold, or a trail, of the offenders that's been cold for a month. Mm-hmm. So they end up interacting, abducting Dr. York. They kill him. Mm-hmm. And we don't know if he was killed on the property or if he had been killed and transported to this property.
Right.
And it's possible that he was the one that was put down in the cellar room and that his body was moved out to the orchard and buried. But it's also possible, you could have had one or more of the family members killed and put down there, and then their bodies were moved. The fact that you have the decomp smell now a month later, I can't say that those bodies were down there for any period of time and decomposed and then moved. It's possible they were just put down there, and then maybe later, a day later or 2, they're moved out, and then the fluids from their wounds is what's causing this horrific smell.
In the stable, they find one of the family's calves. Well, it's the only thing they find, really, and it's dead, starved to death in the pen. So the family, it looks like, has been gone for a solid month from April. And so, again, that matches the wagon. It looks like there is, soil around that over the last couple of months has been moved. And the men start looking around the prairie where this property is, and they start to see indentations in the earth.
Oh.
But they're the freak scared because it's nighttime and there's a serial killer around here. So the next day, they don't do anything about it. And then the next day they come out, and Colonel York, bless that guy, even though his brother has been found, he says, I'm going to help. So he comes back out, and they find at least 7 more victims in shallow graves in that apple orchard. Now comes the weird part. I know this was pretty weird all the way up, but this is the weird one. And now this is your criminal profiling part. Some of the victims have been mutilated. Their penises were cut off. One victim is found wedged 6 feet down in an upright position in a well. Other bodies were dismembered. And so then they don't know the number of victims because they are able to match, all of these body parts together. But they think it is somewhere between 11 and 20 people on this property. And if you look at your photo packet, you will see them discovering the graves and just how deep these poor people had to dig.
Typically, when bodies are buried, you usually see the term shallow grave because it's hard to dig down deep. Most offenders think, I'm going to, put them 6 feet underground. And then when they start doing the digging process, it's a lot of manual labor. They start getting into that hard packed dirt, the deeper they get, and it takes a long time, and they start panicking and they speed things up, or, maybe a witness drives by. So here, obviously, this one photo, which appears to be behind the cabin.
Boy, you see how open that is. That's another preview. Look at that. I mean, there's nothing there. There's nothing out there.
So, but obviously they had to dig down. I mean, you have a man standing in this open pit, and, that pit goes up to his elbows, almost chest height. Who knows how tall he is, but I'm going to assume he's my height. So that's down a ways, that's down 4 to 5 feet. So all 7 of these, the family's not included in these 7 bodies.
They aren't sure because they haven't found heads necessarily. Like they can't come up with the right figure. They're saying between 11 and 20 because there aren't 11 heads or 20 heads. Okay. Some of the stuff is missing. Of course, they could have left it out and animals could have taken, we don't know. But there is one unusual part of this. Besides, of course, the penises being lopped off on some of these people.
I'll comment on that.
Yeah. So this is not the unusual one, but the guy found in the well was so badly mutilated that the cause of his death couldn't be established, but everybody else had died by hammer, and then their throats were cut, and they were all robbed. And, these were young husbands and fathers who were looking to establish a homestead. They were looking for property. And so there is one victim that doesn't fit this profile, and it's a little girl. It's a child, and she's a daughter of one of the victims. They did not do anything. Whoever did this didn't do anything that could be seen to this girl. So there's no mutilation or anything like that, but there's dirt under her fingernails. So I didn't know if either she was buried alive or maybe it, came when she was being dragged but I don't know.
Yeah. I'm not sure you can even draw a conclusion. Yeah. Just, I think, burying a dead body, there's a chance that you're going to, have dirt underneath the fingernails. So there appears to at least be a financial motive as part of the offender committing these crimes. Now, I'd be interested in seeing the specific types of mutilation to the bodies, but penises being cut off. Now I start going into, okay, you're dealing with potentially a sexual predator, and this predator's preferred victim are what appear to be adult men, and it's very possible that this type of mutilation and the penises being cut off, it is very reminiscent of a serial killer out of the Los Angeles area known as Randy Kraft out of Orange County. And who targeted, like Marines and stuff. And he would typically drug them. But, he would, cut their penises off, stuff it down their throats, do all sorts of genital mutilation as well as other types of torture. Wow. There's a sexual sadistic aspect that's happening. And now I'm starting to kind of gravitate towards you have an offender that is taking advantage of these men that have isolated themselves, and we still have the family to deal with, somehow taking control. And I don't know how many offenders, this could be more than one person acting in concert. And then, the mutilation, is that torture to get these men to talk about where their valuables are or something like that? That's a possibility. And even the cutting of the penises off could potentially be along those lines, that it's more of an MO based to accomplish the crime versus a fantasy aspect. It's just that it's really, starting to sound like, the offender or offenders are going, well, we can make money off of these men. Nobody will ever know where they're at, and potentially sexually interact with these men, and kill them the same way, crush their heads in and cut their throat and, stick them in graves.
But where is this person living? I mean, there's nothing out there except this cabin. What is he doing? Just sort of waiting behind a hill for days and days to find these people who are wandering down this trail? These aren't locals. These are people who are, wandering through. How would that even work?
I don't think we can eliminate John Sr. or John Jr. as being the offenders. They could be living in the cabin, selling products out of the store, and one of them's going out, or both of them are going out and killing men, and they're burying them on their own property. So, right now, I think the family still, the fact that they're missing and haven't been found, I think that's kind of compelling in terms of, okay, what is going on with this family?
Well, let me tell you what's going on with this family.
Right, here it goes.
Yeah. So, this is why I love working with someone who doesn't know about historical cases most of the time. I mean, I was grateful you had heard of the Lindbergh case. What's going on is this family is they're very famous. And I wonder how many of the listeners and viewers had guessed this, partway through. But they're very famous because they are called the Bloody Benders. Have you heard of this case before?
No. Benders, is that their last name?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
John and Elvira, and it's the whole family that does this. And they are in the 1800s, probably the most well-known in America serial killers because of what they did. And so the reason that this area was so creepy is because all of the people around were creeped out by the Benders. And it is a very kind of weird, complicated family, but I'm going to try to streamline it. Okay. They're from Germany, and they settled in this county 3 years earlier. And so you've got John Sr. and Elvira. They are 55 and 60. And they had very, very thick accents. Now, I've actually heard people describe them as almost guttural, like they didn't actually speak any kind of a language whatsoever. But, we have some great sources that are on the show notes that are from books, and actually an author that I interviewed who, tried to kind of suss out what was going on with this family. So they've got a son that is 30, John Jr., and Kate, who is 20. We don't know if Kate and John were actually related to John and Elvira. And we don't know if they're related to each other because they seem more like a couple than, a brother and sister. And so it all creeps people out. And then when these folks start going missing, then it really gets scary. And then when the Benders go missing, people are scared of where are the Benders? I think at this point, no one feels like they're the ones who are murdered. They feel like they thought maybe the jig was up and they took off, but we don't really know that yet. Had you heard of this? A family, the Manson family doesn't count. A family of killers, who draw people into their place and kill them with a hammer and drop them down to the trap door, store their bodies, and then drag them to the orchard or different places at night and bury them. Happy Halloween, Paul.
Yeah, no, this is a good one. I am familiar with either male-female couples that are, victimizing, or males who have partnered up. This family, so John Sr. and Elvira are truly a married couple, right?
Yep.
Okay. So that would be like some of these male-female predators, that are truly in a relationship, and then they go out and kill. And then there's various different types of personality aspects to each couple as to, maybe the male's dominant and the female is just following along. And sometimes the female is more involved. And I think there's one couple in Britain. I think her name was Rose. I forget.
Rosemary West.
Where
Fred
she seems to be that sounds right. Where she really seems to be the one that's driving, the criminal activity. Now the younger pair, John Jr. and Kate, it's like these, we don't know if they're truly related or not, even if they are true siblings, brother, sister, they could be in an incestuous relationship.
Yep.
And I would not put that, outside of the realm of possibilities with this family. All four of them could be interacting sexually with each other. But, I don't know, I've never heard of like a foursome like this that I can think of. So that's fascinating to me. And then of course I'm kind of curious in terms of who's doing what to which victim, right? So that's would be part of evaluating this, the psychology of these offenders. And you could see where you could have, a woman in distress on the side of a trail and a guy, horse-drawn wagon pulling over, trying to get, say, do you need help? And then the family ambushes that guy, so it's very easy, for four working in concert to be able to do that.
Yep.
Anyways, I think that's sort of off the top of my head, some of my thoughts, but there is the financial aspect, but they're deviant, right? Yeah. There is a pathology going on with this foursome, and there is a sexual aspect to these crimes. I'm absolutely convinced of that.
I'll tell you, Kate is clearly the draw. I mean, provisions are a draw for some of these people, but Kate is the draw. There's a photo of her. She is described as mesmerizing. She's tall. She's a redhead. She's a clairvoyant. She has ads in newspapers that say she can cure blindness, fits, which are, seizures basically, deafness, and all such diseases. And so the theory goes that she would sort of draw these men in, and that behind a curtain would hide the two men, the brother or whatever, and the father, that they would have hammers. They would beat the guy and then strip him and then drop him under the attic. And then after nightfall would take him to the orchard and bury them. And I don't know anything about who mutilated who, but I will tell you, Kate has a pretty awful reputation. She had threatened a lot of people in town with a knife, probably the knife that was hidden in the mantel clock. The men had been known to conceal hammers in their clothes. And so, I told you she's a clairvoyant, but also they were Catholic. And the sergeant, I held this from you. Sorry. Well, police do it from true crime fans.
Yes.
Yeah, this is my holdback. That Sergeant Dick uncovered something hidden. It's a Catholic prayer book, and it was hidden in the cabin. And the notes in German were this, quote, "Big Slaughter Day, January 8th." And then the phrase, "Hell departed." So I don't know what that means. They took off, it looks like in April. Yeah, and see, we don't know when people were murdered. It's just when they were discovered. Who knows when they were murdered? So there you go. What do you think of all that?
Well, looking at the photo of Kate, she actually is a very, very attractive woman. She's the honeypot. I could see where, just about any guy is going to see her and, be drawn further into the store, The idea that, or sort of the generic sequence that the two men, jumped the guy, bashed his head in, cut the throat, stripped him, and then dumped him down into the cellar. That's all that's happening. I don't buy that at all. Obviously there's dismemberment going on. They've got bodies that are missing heads. You've got penises being cut off. I think, one or both men are probably getting some sort of, having sexual interactions with these male bodies, whether they're dead or alive, who knows? And I wouldn't put it outside the possibility that the two women may be participating sexually with these victims at some level. So now I guess my question is were the Benders ever found?
No. That's why this is such a well-known story for those of us who geek out on 1800s crime. So this is what they do. They track down a partner of theirs who is a German immigrant and had worked with the Benders on getting supplies, and that was about it. He said, I have no idea where they are. They hanged this poor guy from a beam until he's unconscious. They wake him up, interrogate him. He denies any involvement at all. Hang him again. They just keep going back. And it's like waterboarding or something. It was awful. He doesn't know anything about it. What they do, let me tell you what they do know happened. The family leaves in April. They take the horses in this wagon. I'm presuming the reason they abandoned the wagon, the grocery sign from that everybody knew was at that store is in their wagon. So I don't know if they were going to reestablish somewhere else or what they were going to do. But there was a mention of a lame horse connected to the wagon. I think the horse went lame. They realized that they weren't going to be able to do anything. They abandoned everything, but they still stuck together, which I thought was interesting. They end up hiking and they go to a place called Cherryvale, and then they caught a train and they went on to Leavenworth. And they are eating breakfast. Last seen, confirmed sighting, eating breakfast at a hotel in a part of Kansas, not far from Leavenworth. And then they split up. And that is it. There have been sightings. There have been people who were arrested and spent jail time. But it turned out it was definitely not them. There was thought that there were two women, an older one and a younger one, who could have been Kate and Elvira. But it just didn't, the timelines didn't match up. They just couldn't, the math wasn't mathing. They couldn't make it work. And so, when John Sr. and Elvira left, it sounds like they went to St. Louis. John Jr. and Kate went south to the Missouri, Kansas, and Texas Railroad, and they went to Denison, Texas, right here in Texas. And then they went to the border. The rumor is that John Jr. died of a stroke shortly after that. So he was in his 30s. Two women were put on trial, but the cases were dismissed, and there were sightings for the next 20 years. And there was a guy in Colorado in 1901 who claims he had married Kate Bender. The next year, he's murdered. Seems on brand for her. I mean, and then there's a California woman in 1910 that claims that she is Kate Bender on her deathbed. But again, circumstances, her family is like, no, she was never in Kansas. We can prove that. I mean, the Benders were there for 3 years. They started doing this shortly after they arrived in 1870. And then that was it. The crimes fade into Kansas, history. That's why you have that case with the three hammers, because it's on display in a museum. There's museums dedicated to this family. So since 2024, the University of Kansas has been formally excavating the site. And they're looking for more information because it was never fully excavated, but now University of Kansas. Yeah, well, they had never found any bodies officially after that. But yeah, I guess they're looking for more bodies.
Sure.
So we'll see. I mean, this is just going to add to it. This is like a Jack the Ripper. That's the lore. And I know maybe a lot of people hadn't heard of it, but this was the scariest family, that I had heard of. And so sometimes I do hear over and over again people claiming I've done a book or I've written an article about the first serial killer, and the Hart brothers were likely the most, the earliest serial killers. They were in the 1700s, and they were in the American Revolutionary War and raping and murdering people. But of course, we know there were serial killers working for thousands of years that we don't know about. But
yeah, they were just attributed to being werewolves or vampires. It goes kind of going into the Halloween thing, right?
Yep, it's very spooky. But the idea that you have this kind of collusion with a family, and I don't know what the motive was, but I mean, we've talked about the sexual component and the weird quote and the clairvoyance. It's maddening when you like crime history to have a family like the Bloody Benders and not understand not just what their motives were, but also where the hell did they go?
Sure.
So it's a Halloween mystery.
Yeah, I'm looking at the photo of the three hammers, and I'm kind of curious to see what else they got out of the Bender house, because I'm looking at these three hammers going, well, you know what? The Bender family they were touching those hammer handles a fair amount. Can we get some good DNA that's representative of one of the Benders and do genealogy and see if any offspring, any descendants pop up anywhere? Or do they have any clothing items that the Benders wore out of the cabin, that we might be able to go after, or a hairbrush, what all
we
did
have
they collect?
the knife.
That knife is just showing dripped blood on the blade. The handle is looking unstained. I mean, it looks like a smaller knife. It's like a paring knife.
Yeah, it's a paring knife.
It doesn't look like it was used to stab or cut a throat. It had some blood, drip on it. And, most certainly that blood could possibly be, it could be from one of the Benders who got cut,
yep.
In a battle with the victims. It could be an unknown victim's bloodstain that today we might be able to identify who that person is.
Yeah, this is an enduring mystery, certainly in the Midwest, and people have asked me about the case, and I just thought, okay, finally, we'll stick Paul on it and see what happens.
Well, I just, you mentioned that, one of the bodies found was a little girl.
Mm-hmm.
And she hadn't been, there was no obvious cause of death. She hadn't been mutilated.
Right.
I think I initially presumed that she was a daughter of one of the adult male victims. Is it possible she's related to the Benders?
Well, they identify her as the victim's, her name was Mary Ann Longcar, and her dad was one of the male victims.
One of the male victims. So she just happened to be with Dad when they abducted him.
Yep.
As they're excavating this property, I would think that there's a chance that they may have either aborted remains or actual infant bodies that were product of conception between these four people. Because I think they're, this type of psychology, this type of pathology, all four of them could be having sex with each other.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So, who knows? And it's possible that these women, Kate or Elvira, had conceived either from John Sr. or John Jr. or both and, killed the kids.
Well, with that, Paul Holes, that is less spooky and more disgusting. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Hey.
But listen, I wanted to give you one of the weirder cases that we have, and I'm relieved. I almost kicked myself when I sent you the photo of the case with the hammers, because it says the Benders, and I thought, oh my God, this Paul, kind of weird thing happened.
My eyes just tunnel visioned on the hammers. I didn't even read what it said.
I hated when you revealed that you knew the Miranda case. I was thinking, oh no, I don't want him to know about Miranda, but this is good. I'm glad I got you.
Anybody involved, anybody who's been through the police academy knows about the Miranda case.
I know. Okay, well, I'm glad I got you with the Benders. Okay, Next week, probably not a murderous family, but I welcome those stories because I do think the dynamic is so interesting. I just would like them caught next time. So I'll work on that for the next case.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks once again, Kate.
Thank you, Paul. Happy Halloween.
You too.